Thanksgiving is just around the corner and it's getting pretty cold around here, so I want something that's nice and warm and comforting. And chicken pot pie is just the dish to do that. So let me show you how to make it. Alright, I will be starting out with these 3 chicken thighs here. I'm going to season them liberally with some salt and some pepper. And then I'm going to be using herbs de Provence if you have it, but if you don't, use Italian seasoning. And if you don't have this at all, you can totally omit this and it will be just as good. And of course, I seasoned it on both sides, and I'm just going to drizzle a bit of olive oil so that I can rub it all over so that the seasoning can stick on the chicken. Now, for this recipe, you can use leftover chicken and leftover turkey or whatever other leftover meat you have. It will be perfect for this dish, but I don't have any leftovers, so I'm using some chicken thighs. And I'm using chicken thighs instead of chicken breast because, well, chicken thighs are just juicier than chicken breast, so I will have less of a chance of drying them out. And all I'm going to do now is take these and roast at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 to 25 minutes or until cooked. So here are my pie dough ingredients. I am using 250 grams of all-purpose flour, 200 grams of butter that's been cubed, and some ice cold water here. Now, the important thing to note is that all my ingredients are very, very, very cold. I put them in the freezer until I am ready to use them, or just until the water starts to crystallize. So into a food processor, I'm dumping in my flour and my butter. Again, make sure they both are very, very cold. And to this, I'm gonna add in a big pinch of salt. And if I were making a sweet pie, I would add some sugar, but salt is just fine here. And the technique here is to pulse it until it becomes pebbly. I don't want to run the food processor because I don't want the butter to melt into the flour. So by pulsing it, I will end up with pebbly pieces, which will then give me flaky crust at the end. So I know it's kind of hard to see, but once they look like this, pebbly, like that, I'm ready to add the water. I'm gonna start with 4 tablespoons of ice cold water, and I will be adding more water accordingly. I don't want to add too much to start because I don't want to overhydrate this dough, because if it's too wet, then it won't get nice and flaky and tender. I'm gonna give that a quick pulse, and I'm just gonna pulse it just enough until the water is mixed into the flour. And I'm just gonna take a bit of the dough and squeeze it in my hands to see if it comes together. If it comes together, that's enough dough. If it's not, I'm gonna add more water. So I'm gonna go ahead and add 4 more tablespoons because that's how much I think it'll need. If you're inexperienced with making pie dough, I suggest go a little bit slower. Don't add 4 tablespoons at a time. I would add the first 4 tablespoons and then maybe 2 more and then 2 more after that. But after pulsing it, I squeeze it in my hand, and as you can see here, it comes together perfectly, and it's still a little crumbly and it's not sticky at all, so that's the perfect consistency. And now that it's perfect, I'm going to dump it onto my work surface and I'm going to get ready for shaping. So the technique here that I'm using is that I'm just simply gathering it and pressing it together because I don't want to knead this dough. If I knead it, I would be building the gluten structures, which then will make this dough very, very tough and not soft and tender and flaky. So I'm literally just pressing it just until it comes together like this. And if you look at the dough, you can see bits and pieces of the butter, and that just means that I will get very, 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 very flaky dough. And now I'm gonna cut it into 2 pieces and then shape it into circles because this is gonna be a pie with 2 crusts. And then once I have it shaped roughly into a circle like this, I'm gonna go ahead and saran wrap this. And then when I get it wrapped up, I'm just gonna press it down so that it's nice and even, so that when I roll it out later, that the crust will be nice and even. And of course, I do this for both pieces. So I wanna leave my pie dough in the fridge for 2 hours before I start to roll it out. Now for my veggies, I'm using 1 whole carrot, and I'm just gonna dice it into cubes, just like this. And then for the mushrooms, all I'm gonna do is destem these, save the stems for the stalk, and slice them down as thick or as thin as you want them. And I'm using about 8 shiitake mushrooms and 4 to 5 button mushrooms because I didn't have enough shiitake mushrooms. But then again, both mushrooms, stem it and slice it. And for the onions, all I'm gonna do is take off the roots like this, and then I'm gonna cube it down to 1-inch pieces as well. So I'm looking for about the same size as my carrots. And I'm also gonna use about 2 cloves of garlic, and I'm just gonna go ahead and mince it down. Nothing fussy about this. And for the thyme, I'm gonna use enough to give me about a tablespoon of thyme. So I'm just pulling it off of the stem like this. But if your thyme stems are nice and tender and not woody looking like mine, you can go ahead and chop it down instead. Either way works fine. So by now my chicken should be done, and I've taken it out to cool for a little bit, so cool to touch. And all I'm gonna do is shred the chicken. You don't need to make it too fine of a shred, but just shred it down as much as you can. To a pan that's been heating a medium heat with a drizzle of oil, whatever oil you want, I'm going to dump in my mushrooms to let that cook first. I essentially want to cook this down so that it's nice and soft and tender and until it starts to get brown. Of course, add drizzles of oil as you go if it gets dry. And all I'm going to do here is season it with some salt to pull out some more moisture to cook that off. So once my mushrooms has been cooked down, I'm going to add in another drizzle of olive oil. I'm using olive oil throughout this whole process, by the way. And I throw in my onions to let that cook with the mushrooms as well. And I'm just cooking these just until they get soft. I don't want them to get too soft. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in my garlic and cook that until I smell it, essentially. And then once I smell it, that just tells me it's time to add in the chicken. And I'm cooking the chicken just until it heats through, not to cook it further because it's already cooked, right? And this is why I don't want to use chicken breast, because it will dry out in this process. Anyways, once my chicken's heated up, I'm going to add in my carrots. And I don't bother cooking it through because it will cook when I cook the gravy. So now is when I add in 2 tablespoons of butter. And I'm just going to melt that down. And as soon as it does, I'm going to go in and add 2 tablespoons of flour. So a 1-to-1 ratio of butter to flour. And I'm just going to cook the flour until it starts to smell nutty. Because if you don't cook the flour out, it will taste floury. And I don't want that in my gravy or the pot pie sauce. But I guess if you like floury taste, then don't cook it out. But I suggest cooking it out. So at this stage, my flour has cooked out and it smells very fragrant. I'm gonna add in my stock, vegetable stock, link in the top right corner. I'm gonna add in about 1/3 cup at a time. I'm adding in a total of a cup, but this is how I'm doing it. I'm adding in a 1/3 cup. I'm stirring it through, let it cook, the flour absorb the broth, and then add in another 1/3 cup. Do the same. And then once it's been absorbed, add in another 1/3 cup. And by now, the last of the 1/3 cup, I should see a sauce developing, which is what I'm aiming for. And I know it looks a little dry right now, but I'm also still adding some heavy cream, which I will go ahead and do now. And I'm adding in a 1/3 of a cup and just stirring this through. And this is gonna give me richness. It's gonna give me this like unctuous taste to my sauce. And to me, this is good consistency. If you want it more runnier, you can add more cream and more stock. But again, this is perfect for me. So I'm gonna go ahead and add in my thyme and some frozen peas. I add in about 1/2 cup and then stir it through, cook it until the peas have been melted, essentially. So I'm adjusting my seasoning with some salt and some pepper. And of course I'm going to add in mushroom powder because umami. But once my seasoning is perfect, I'm going to set that aside to let it cool. Now 2 hours later, my pie dough is ready to be rolled out. I'm going to flour my surface, not too much, just enough to prevent sticking because I don't want to add more flour to this. And then I'm gonna flour my rolling pin, sorry for the gesture, and the top of the dough. And then in hyperspeed, I'm gonna roll these out to about 1/4 of an inch thick maximum and 1/8 of an inch thick minimum. Any thinner will be too thin, any thicker will be too thick. Just make sure you roll it out so that it's big enough to fit whatever you're cooking your pie in. And in my case, I'm using a cast iron. And so to measure it out, I'm gonna put my pan upside down on the dough and I'm gonna cut an inch boundary around the pan and then just pull off the excess like this. So to fit my dough into my pan, I'm just gonna pick up the edges and let it drop into the pan so that it will fit perfectly. And I'm not tugging the dough into the pan. And then I'm gonna roll out the other half of the dough, also the same thickness. And I'm gonna cut out also an inch boundary around the pan. And this will be my top. To a bowl, I'm gonna crack in 1 egg, and this is gonna be my egg wash. And of course, just whip up the egg as well as you can. Make sure it's mixed through. So I'm gonna fill up my pie now, and I'm filling it up so that there's about an inch of pie dough left, give or take. And of course, this is a 2-crust pie, so I'm gonna go ahead and top it. Well, okay, take it off because I messed up a little bit. What I'm gonna do is egg wash it first. And once I got that egg washed, now I'm gonna go ahead and top it. And all I'm gonna do is crimp the bottom dough with the top dough together. I'm not doing any pattern yet, just make sure they're stuck together. And then with the paring knife, I'm gonna go around and trim it, just so it can fit my pan better. And then no fancy design here, I'm just crimping it like this wavy design. Crimp it however you want. If you're not good at crimping, just use a fork and press it together. That will look just as nice, I promise, okay? And then with that egg wash, just brush it all over. Make sure it's nice and glossy because this is what will give you that nice golden crust. And then once it's painted with the egg wash, just cut some slits at the top. I cut about 4. This will help the pie vent so that your pie won't explode in the oven. So once it looks nice like this, stick it in the oven at 400 degrees for at least half an hour. But if it's not nice and golden yet, then cook it for a little bit longer. And then for me, after half an hour, this is what my pie looks like. Nice and golden and crusty. And then let it rest for about 10 minutes. And after the rest, it's time for the taste test. Do you guys see this? Look at the crust. It's just nice and golden and beautiful. Okay, so I'm gonna get myself a slice. I'll be right back. All right, I have my piece cut. All right, look. So I want you to see the crust. It's just nice and golden. It's golden all the way through. Even the bottom is nice and crusty. Look at that. Okay. Ooh. And the smell is just so buttery. And you can tell, look at this. It's just very, very flaky. All right. So let's try this. All right, let's get the crust. All right, cheers. So good. Okay. I want to try a piece of like the crust edge here. Because I want you to hear how crusty and how flaky this is. Okay. So I'm just gonna take a piece. All right. Cheers. All right. Listen. Okay. So good. I don't know if that came through at all, but the crust is perfect. It's nice and flaky. It's almost like puff pastry, but not really. It's not that many layers. It's super tender because, I chilled everything. The flour, the water, the butter, all put in the freezer until I'm ready. And then after getting the dough rolled out, and then putting it back in the fridge to get cooler before baking helped a lot. You really, really, really want to get the dough as cold as you can get it without being frozen, of course, so that when you bake it, it becomes nice and tender. Of course, the filling is very good. It's chickeny, it's mushroomy, it's savory, it's slightly creamy from the cream I put in there. So this dish is just perfect. It's soulful, it's delicious, it's warm, and it keeps, your body warm in the cold winter. So, if you like this video, hit that like button. For more videos like this, hit the subscribe button or that button over there, and hit this button right here for my previous video. And let me know how this recipe goes in the comments below, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you. Bye.